Joined by Kenneth Roth here in New York, Executive Director of Human Rights Watch. You've put out numerous reports on the situation of people who are migrating as a result of conflict, persecution, hunger, all the different reasons they do. What do you think has to happen now, Ken?
Well, Amy, let me first put this in perspective because, we're talking about a crisis. And yes, 310, 320,000 people are a lot of people. But Europe's population as a whole is about 500 million. So what we're talking about, the number of people who've come this year is less than 0.1% of Europe's population. Now, compare that to the United States, where undocumented people in this country are about 11 million. That's about 3.5% of the U.S. population. So in other words, the U.S. population has completely integrated massive more people, a much larger percentage than Europe is facing. Indeed, the U.S. has built an economy around these people, so that it would be difficult to send them back. We're having a debate now about a path to citizenship, but realistically, these people are here to stay, and the U.S. has just incorporated them. So this is not really a crisis. Europe is perfectly able to manage integrating 0.1% of its population. The problem is it doesn't want to, or at least some people don't want to. We've seen real leadership. You saw the French Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, saying very powerfully, speaking for the need to welcome these people. Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, has also been very outspoken in this regard. So we are seeing some leadership in Europe, but the right wing in particular is demagoguing this issue and is creating real problems, which are not real problems, they're political problems.
So what exactly should the European Union do right now?
Well, it's important to recognize that a very substantial percentage of these people are refugees. That is to say, they're fleeing conflict and persecution. Yes, there's some economic migrants among them, but most at least have a right not to be sent back to persecution. And once they land on European soil, they actually have a right to have their asylum claim adjudicated. And if indeed they are found to be refugees, as most of them will be, they're entitled to stay. So what Europe needs to do is to stop treating the Mediterranean or the often dangerous land crossing, stop treating sort of drowning and death as a way of preserving its borders. It needs to find safe and legal routes for these people who really do need to flee, a way for them to get to Europe without risking their lives. And, we've seen modest steps in that direction. If you look at sort of the way Europe has responded to the Mediterranean sea crossing, when the Italians were in charge, they had something called Mare Nostrum, which very much focused on protecting people. The European Union then took over about a year ago with Operation Triton and put a priority on preserving Europe's borders over protecting people until this last spring when 1,000 people died in the course of 1 week, and then it changed. But I'm not sure if it's changed enough, because even just this weekend, we've seen a number of drownings off the Libyan coast. Europe should be patrolling much more aggressively near the Mediterranean coast to try to rescue people as quickly as possible, so they're not continuing to use drowning as a way of preserving Europe's borders.
So what does the United States have to do with it? I mean, you have these massive conflicts that have roiled the globe. Do we have a responsibility here?
Well, yes. If you look at why people are fleeing, well, let's take the Syrians, who are the largest percentage. In an ordinary war, you can get some degree of protection by moving away from the front lines. But in Syria, Assad is dropping barrel bombs in the middle of civilian neighborhoods that happen to be controlled by the opposition. There is no safe place to move in Syria if you're in opposition-held territory, which is why we have 4 million refugees from Syria today. So one very important thing to do is to go to the root causes of this, to try to put real pressure on Assad to stop barrel bombing civilians and to take comparable steps in the other major refugee-producing countries like Somalia, Eritrea, and Afghanistan. Let's not forget why we have this crisis. It's not that everybody woke up this morning and thought it'd be nice to move to Europe. These people are being forced out because of severe conflict and persecution.
And do you see connections between what we're seeing in the United States? I mean, you have the Republican rhetoric. You have Donald Trump saying, build a wall, Mexicans are rapists, all 11 million undocumented people should be deported. You have Chris Christie saying they should be treated like FedEx packages and tracked. What are the connections you see between what's happening in the United States and what's happening in Europe?
Well, there are commonalities between the right wing in both Europe and the United States. And what this is really about is some sense that the migrants are somehow destroying American culture or European culture, that these societies cannot incorporate the changes that would result from welcoming in, hundreds of thousands, or in some cases in the U.S., millions of people. Now, the United States, in fact, is just fine. In fact, it's been greatly enriched by the immigration. And it's not as if, American culture is radically different today from what it was, 2 or 3 decades ago. It's not as if American democracy is in jeopardy. But this is nonetheless an argument that the right wing likes to put forward, that, the American way of life is in jeopardy. And you see very similar arguments in Europe, aggravated by the fact that so many of these asylum seekers and migrants are Muslims. And there's this terrifying fear in Europe that largely Christian Europe is somehow going to be changed for the worse because a handful of Muslims are going to come in. And so there is this unfortunate right-wing racist commonality.
I want to thank you, Ken Roth, for being with us, and I hope you'll stay because we're going to be talking about Egypt soon with Sharifa Bokadous and Cairo, the 3 Al Jazeera reporters that were just sentenced to 3 years in prison. Kenneth Roth, Executive Director of Human Rights here in New York, and thanks so much to Dr. Chiara Montaldo, who is coordinator with Doctors Without Borders, speaking to us from Pozzallo in Sicily, Italy. Of course, we'll continue to follow this issue. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace